It was the spring of 1995 in a small, tight-knit village in the West Bank, Palestine. Noor, a 30-year-old devoted Muslim wife, was carrying a burden that threatened to unravel not only her marriage, but the very foundation of her life. Her husband, Khalid, a devout man deeply rooted in their village's traditions, remained unaware of the storm that was quietly building around them. Noor had always been seen as the perfect wife and mother. She spent her days caring for their two young children and maintaining their modest home, while Khalid worked long hours at his shop in the nearby city. From the outside, they appeared to be the model family, a harmonious reflection of the village's ideals. But under the surface, Noor was battling a loneliness that she couldn't explain, a void that Khalid's affection no longer filled. It all began with Yusuf, a family friend. Yusuf was different. He was Jewish, from a neighboring village, and despite the differences in their backgrounds, he had been a close friend to both Khalid and Noor's family for years. He was a man of charm, intelligence and warmth, always offering a friendly smile and understanding in ways Khalid never could. While the political situation between Palestinians and Jews in the region had always been tense, their friendship transcended these barriers. But what started as innocent conversations between Noor and Yusuf soon shifted. There was a connection that neither of them could deny, an unspoken bond that lingered in their exchanges. Their meetings became more frequent, under the guise of family visits and community gatherings, but the tension between them was palpable. The secrecy, the quiet glances, and the stolen moments were like an intoxicating game that Noor couldn't stop playing. It filled the emotional void she had been living with for so long, and for the first time in years, she felt alive. As Noor struggled to navigate the guilt of her growing feelings for Yusuf, the weight of her choices began to haunt her. She knew what she was doing was dangerous, not just morally, but in a place where such a scandal could destroy everything. Khalid was an honorable man, respected by everyone in the village, and any hint of an affair would not only ruin their marriage, but bring shame upon their entire family. Yet despite the risks, Noor found herself unable to resist the pull of Yusuf's attention. She kept telling herself it was harmless, just emotional comfort. But deep down, she knew the truth. It was much more than that. One quiet evening in May, while Khalid was away on a business trip, Noor and Yusuf found themselves alone again. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, and before they could stop themselves, the lines were crossed. What had started as an emotional affair now became something physical, and with that, there was no turning back. The gravity of their secret weighed heavy on Noor. Each day became a battle between her desire and the shame that gnawed at her. She prayed for strength, asked for guidance, but her heart was torn in two directions. The calmness of her life was slipping through her fingers, and with every stolen moment with Yusuf, the reality of her situation became harder to deny. But Noor wasn't the only one who had noticed the shift. Rumors began to surface in the village. Whispers in the market, questioning glances from neighbors, and unspoken tension during family gatherings. It was as if everyone could sense that something was wrong. Khalid, oblivious at first, began to notice subtle changes in Noor. She seemed distracted, distant, and no longer met his eyes when they spoke. He brushed it off as stress or perhaps exhaustion, but the seed of doubt was quietly planted. In the shadows of this once peaceful village, a dangerous secret was growing, and soon it would unravel in a way that no one could have imagined. By the summer of 1995, the air in the village was stifling, not just from the relentless heat, but from the tension that was brewing in Noor's household. Khalid had grown more suspicious with each passing day. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something was different about Noor. She was distant, often lost in thought, and her once warm and caring demeanor had turned cold and mechanical. She no longer laughed at his jokes, and the conversations that once flowed so easily now felt forced if they happened at all. Khalid tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, a phase that every marriage goes through. But the nagging feeling of doubt gnawed at him. His instincts told him that something was wrong, though he couldn't have imagined the truth. Noor, on the other hand, was barely holding herself together. The weight of her affair with Yusuf had become unbearable, and though she tried to act normal, the cracks were beginning to show. The stolen moments with Yusuf had turned into something more frequent, more dangerous. Each time they met, Noor felt the walls closing in on her. She knew that their secret couldn't stay hidden forever, yet she couldn't bring herself to stop. Yusuf, too, had become reckless. What started as a quiet affair, hidden in the shadows, was now teetering on the edge of exposure. They met in secret places, abandoned corners of the village, quiet paths away from prying eyes, but they had grown careless. The thrill of the affair had blinded them to the reality of their situation. One afternoon, as Khalid was returning home earlier than usual from work, he spotted Yusuf walking away from his house. His heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual for Yusuf to visit. After all, he was a family friend. But something about the way he hurried off without greeting Khalid made his stomach churn with suspicion. Khalid's mind raced, but he tried to push the thought away. Yet, the image of Yusuf's hurried steps stuck with him, and that night, as he lay in bed next to Noor, the doubts began to creep in again. Noor could feel Khalid's growing unease. He had started watching her more closely, his eyes filled with questions he wasn't yet ready to ask. The pressure was building, and every passing day felt like walking on thin ice. She prayed more often now, asking for forgiveness, for the strength to end the affair. But each time she met Yusuf, her resolve crumbled. It was as if she was trapped in a web of her own making, unable to escape, even though she knew it could all end in disaster. By late summer, rumors in the village had started to grow louder. Noor's absence from certain gatherings, the quiet but pointed questions from other women in the market. Something was amiss, and the villagers were beginning to notice. Khalid's sister, Fatima, had always been protective of her brother. She had her suspicions for some time, having noticed the way Yusuf and Noor exchanged glances during family events. But it wasn't until that fateful afternoon, when she saw them speaking in hushed tones behind the old olive trees near the market, that her suspicions turned into certainty. Fatima wasted no time. She went straight to Khalid, her heart heavy with the news she was about to deliver. "Brother," she began, her voice trembling with both anger and sadness, "I don't want to bring shame upon our family, but I can no longer stay silent. Something is happening between Noor and Yusuf. I've seen them together, and I know it's not innocent." Khalid stared at her, stunned into silence. His heart pounded in his chest as her words sank in. The world around him seemed to crumble. He wanted to deny it, to accuse Fatima of lies, but deep down he knew. The signs had been there all along, and he had chosen to ignore them. He stood up abruptly, his fists clenched in anger and betrayal, but Fatima grabbed his arm, her voice steady. "You must be sure before you act, Khalid. This is not something we can undo." That night, Khalid didn't sleep. His mind was a storm of emotions, rage, confusion, disbelief. How could Noor, the woman he had trusted and loved, betray him like this? And with Yusuf, a man he had considered a friend, almost like a brother. The betrayal was too much to bear, but he knew Fatima was right. He couldn't act on suspicion alone. He needed proof, and he would find it. The tension in their home grew unbearable. Noor, sensing that something had changed in Khalid, tried to act normal, but it was too late. The walls were closing in. The quiet whispers in the village had reached a fever pitch, and the secret that had once been theirs alone was now on the verge of being exposed. Khalid began to watch Noor's every move, his mind consumed with thoughts of her betrayal. He followed her discreetly, listened for every phone call, every whispered conversation. He was determined to catch her in the act, to confront her and Yusuf with the truth. But what he didn't know was that the storm that was coming would destroy far more than just his marriage. As the days passed, the tension in the house became suffocating, and Noor's world began to unravel. She could feel the end approaching, like a dark cloud looming over her, but she didn't know how or when it would strike. The affair, once thrilling and secret, had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape, and with every passing moment, the danger grew closer. By the fall of 1995, Khalid had become a man possessed. The quiet, calm demeanor that once defined him had been replaced by an obsessive need to uncover the truth. Every word Noor spoke, every move she made, he analyzed with a sharp, untrusting gaze. The doubt that once lingered in the back of his mind had grown into a certainty that was impossible to ignore. The air in their home was thick with unspoken tension, a sense of impending doom that neither could escape. Noor, though unaware of the full extent of Khalid's suspicions, could feel the shift in his behavior. His presence had become suffocating. He was always around, always watching. The warmth between them had long since faded, replaced by cold, uncomfortable silences. She knew she was running out of time, that the delicate web of lies she had spun was about to collapse. Yusuf, too, had noticed the growing pressure. Their once frequent meetings had become increasingly risky, and with the whispers in the village growing louder, they both knew the affair was teetering on the edge of exposure. Yet, despite the looming danger, they couldn't bring themselves to end it. The temptation, the thrill of the forbidden was too strong. Each time they met, the sense of danger only heightened their connection, drawing them further into a spiral they couldn't control. One late afternoon, while Khalid was supposedly working, Noor and Yusuf met again, this time in a secluded area near an old olive grove, away from the prying eyes of the village. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversation filled with tension and desperation. Noor's face was pale, her eyes darting around as if expecting to be caught at any moment. "We need to stop this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's too dangerous now. Khalid, he knows something." Yusuf, though concerned, refused to let go. "We can be careful. Just a little longer, Noor. Don't you see? I can't lose you now." His words, though meant to comfort, only added to Noor's growing sense of dread. She knew it was too late. The walls were closing in, and no amount of careful planning could prevent the inevitable. Unbeknownst to them, Khalid had already suspected this meeting. He had taken to following Noor in secret, watching her movements from a distance, waiting for the moment when his suspicions would be confirmed. That afternoon, as he watched from the shadows of the olive trees, his worst fears were realized. There, just a few meters away, he saw them together, Yusuf and Noor speaking in low, intimate tones, their faces close, their connection undeniable. The sight sent a surge of rage through Khalid's body. His breath quickened, his hands clenched into fists. Every emotion he had tried to suppress for weeks, anger, betrayal, humiliation, came rushing to the surface. But he didn't confront them. Not yet. He knew he needed more than just this moment. He needed undeniable proof, something that would destroy their lives once and for all. That night, Khalid returned home in silence. Noor, sensing his tension, avoided him as much as possible. The children, oblivious to the storm brewing between their parents, played quietly in their room, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Khalid didn't speak to Noor. He didn't need to. The weight of his knowledge hung between them like a dark cloud, suffocating the air in the room. In the days that followed, Khalid's obsession grew. He became more methodical, more deliberate. He knew Yusuf's habits, knew where and when they met. But he needed undeniable proof, something that would leave no room for denial when the confrontation came. He began to search Noor's belongings in secret, going through her drawers, her phone, looking for anything that would confirm what he already knew. It wasn't long before he found it. Hidden among her things was a small note, crumpled and worn, written in Yusuf's handwriting. The words were simple, but they confirmed everything. "Meet me by the olive trees tomorrow, same time. I miss you." The discovery was like a knife to Khalid's heart. Any lingering doubts he had were erased in an instant. The note, small and seemingly insignificant, held the power to shatter their lives completely. And now, armed with the proof he needed, Khalid's anger turned into a cold, calculated plan. He would confront them. He would expose their betrayal for the whole village to see. But he wouldn't do it in a fit of rage. No, he would be patient. He would wait for the perfect moment, and when it came, he would make sure there was no escape for either of them. The night before the confrontation, Khalid lay awake, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. His love for Noor, once pure and strong, had curdled into something dark and twisted. He couldn't understand how she could have betrayed him in such a way, how Yusuf, a man he had trusted, could have done this to him. The betrayal ran deep, cutting into the very core of who he was. But soon it would all be over. Tomorrow their secret would be exposed, and Khalid would have his vengeance. As dawn broke over the village, Khalid rose quietly from bed, his movements deliberate and calm. Noor, unaware of what was about to unfold, went about her morning routine, preparing breakfast for the children, smiling at them as if nothing were wrong. But Khalid's eyes remained cold, distant, as he watched her, knowing that by the end of the day, everything would change. And so, the trap was set. Khalid, filled with a burning need for justice, prepared himself for the moment when their lies would be laid bare. The air in the village was thick with anticipation, though no one yet knew what was coming. But soon, the truth would be revealed, and the price of betrayal would be paid in full. The sun was setting over the west bank, casting long shadows across the village, as Khalid made his way to the olive grove. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was eerily calm. The time had come, and there was no turning back. He had spent the day in a haze, going through the motions of daily life, but every step was a step closer to this moment, the moment when the truth would finally be revealed, and his revenge would be complete. Noor, unaware of Khalid's intentions, had gone about her day with an increasing sense of unease. She hadn't seen Yusuf for days, their last meeting leaving her with a pit of dread in her stomach. The secrecy, the lies, the constant fear of being caught, it was all becoming too much. That afternoon, Yusuf had sent her a message, asking to meet again at their usual spot by the olive trees, but something inside her screamed not to go. Still, she couldn't resist. The pull between them was too strong, even now, with everything hanging in the balance. As Noor approached the olive grove, the air felt different. There was an unnatural stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. She saw Yusuf standing in the shadows, waiting for her. But something felt wrong. She hesitated for a moment, her heart racing. Before finally stepping toward him, before she could speak, Khalid emerged from the shadows. The look in his eyes froze Noor in place. She had never seen him like this before, cold, detached, and filled with a quiet fury that terrified her to the core. Yusuf, too, was caught off guard. His face paled as Khalid stepped closer, the tension between the three of them thick in the air. "Khalid." Noor's voice was barely a whisper, trembling with fear. She wanted to explain, to apologize, but the words stuck in her throat. She knew there was nothing she could say to make this right. Khalid's eyes never left her. "I know," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know everything." The weight of his words crashed down on Noor like a wave, and the reality of what was happening finally sank in. There was no escape. The secret she had fought so hard to keep was out in the open, and the consequences were about to come crashing down. Yusuf, desperate to defuse the situation, took a step forward. "Khalid, please, let's talk about this. It's not what you think." "Not what I think," Khalid interrupted, his voice rising with anger. "I saw you. I followed you. I watched you. How could you do this to me? To my family? To her?" Yusuf opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, Khalid lunged. In a flash, a knife appeared in Khalid's hand. The same knife he had used countless times at his shop, now a tool of vengeance. The world seemed to slow as Khalid swung the blade, his movements fueled by months of rage and betrayal. Noor screamed, but it was too late. The knife plunged into Yusuf's chest, the force of the blow sending him staggering backward. Blood poured from the wound, staining the ground beneath him. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with shock and pain. But Khalid didn't stop. The anger that had built up inside him for so long now exploded in a torrent of violence. He struck again and again, each stab a release of the fury he had been holding in. By the time it was over, Yusuf's lifeless body lay on the ground, his blood soaking into the earth. Khalid stood over him, breathing heavily, his hand still clutching the bloodied knife. His rage had consumed him, and now, in the aftermath of his actions, a deep emptiness began to settle in. Noor fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her hands trembling as she reached out for Yusuf's body. The man she had shared so many stolen moments with was now gone, and it was all because of her. The weight of her guilt was crushing, and she could barely breathe under the force of it. Khalid, still in shock from what he had done, looked down at her with a mixture of disgust and sorrow. "You destroyed everything," he said quietly, his voice filled with a hollow sadness. "You and him. You ruined our family. And now it's over." The sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. Villagers drawn by Noor's screams rushed to the scene. As they arrived, gasps and whispers filled the air. The once peaceful olive grove had become a crime scene. The truth of Noor's affair now laid bare for the entire village to see. The shame, the betrayal, the murder. It was all out in the open, and there was no going back. The police arrived soon after, and Khalid, numb with shock, offered no resistance as they arrested him. He was led away in handcuffs, his eyes vacant, as if the man he had been was already gone. Noor was taken into custody as well, her sobs echoing through the night as she was dragged away from Yusuf's body. The village, once quiet and filled with the routine of daily life, was now a place of scandal and tragedy, and the story of the affair and the murder spread like wildfire. In the months that followed, the trial of Khalid became the talk of the entire region. The details of the affair, the betrayal, and the brutal murder were laid bare in the courtroom, shocking everyone who had known them. Khalid, though guilty of murder, was seen by many as a man driven to the edge by the ultimate betrayal. His plea for leniency under the laws of the land was heard, and his sentence was reduced. He would spend the next 20 years in prison, but the emotional scars of what had happened would never fade. As for Noor, the shame of her affair would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her once respected name was now a source of disgrace, and the community that had once embraced her now turned their backs. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison for her role in the affair, but no punishment could compare to the guilt she carried inside. The story of Noor and Yusuf's deadly affair would become a cautionary tale in the village, a reminder of how betrayal and forbidden desires can destroy even the strongest of families. What had started as a secret between two people had spiraled into a tragedy that left lives shattered and a family broken beyond repair. The olive grove, once a place of quiet reflection, would forever be marked by the blood spilled that day and the memory of that fateful evening when love turned to violence would haunt the village for years to come.